My name is Isabelle McConville, and I am a bookseller and producer here at Barnes& Noble, and I'm so excited to be here with a debut author I've quickly become a fan of, the author of To the Moon and Back, Eliana Ramage. Eliana, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the show. Very, very, very honored to be here.
First, can I just ask you, how does it feel to actually see your book in my hands right now? Can you just tell me what you're thinking, what you're feeling?
Every time, I've only seen it a few times in other people's hands, but every time I see it, I'm like, where'd you get that? Like, it's still very much surreal for it to exist like outside of many Microsoft Word documents.
Yes, yes. I that has to feel so surreal. I love asking debut authors this question because I can't imagine what it's like to just really see a dream like this. And we'll get to
Yes.
dreams and what
Okay.
that what that means in the book as well. But just
Mm.
to see it manifest into a physical object and like, you've worked so hard towards this thing, I can only imagine what that feels like.
Yes. It's it's bizarre. And for this, I say this book as if I have like 10 others. For this book, my first and only book, um, I started it when I was in college, and that was 12 years ago. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you could talk to me a little bit about like really where this book started for you. It's
Mm,
wild to me it was 12 years ago. Can you tell me about how you knew you wanted to write this book and like if you even had a
mhm.
first spark of creativity that really, sent this book on its way?
Yes, it's interesting because the first spark happened a few years before I got anywhere near the idea of there being an astronaut in this particular book. I was so I went to a Dartmouth College, which has a pretty big Native student population, Native Studies program. And I was in a room with many different Native students. We were all freshmen working on projects. A lot of our independent projects were pretty past based about like the histories of our people. And there was a sophomore in the room who said, guys, like if anyone in this room becomes an astronaut, and that didn't happen, I can like fast forward and tell you that didn't happen. But he said, if anyone in this room becomes an astronaut, then that's going to be part of the continuing story of your people. Um, and that had not occurred to me before. I was newly trying to think through what it would mean to be Cherokee outside of my parents' house. So I like heard that sentence and then stepped away from it for a few years. And then later on, um, I was thinking about like, what it would mean to be Cherokee outside of my parents' house. I was thinking about how the first Cherokee story that I could remember being told was that of removal and the Trail of Tears, which was true and it was foundational to me as a Cherokee child. But I was starting to realize that it held me at a distance from thoughts of our collective future. Um, So, what I wanted to do with this book eventually, as this was kind of happening under the surface, is I wanted to think about um, optimism and our responsibility to not be cynical, to improve things for future generations. I think science, space, but science as a whole is a really beautiful way that some people choose to contribute to that group project of humanity. So, I think that led to this last step, this question of if I believe that we're going to have some people on Mars, then I believe that some of them will be Cherokee. If some of them are Cherokee, then what will it mean to those future people to be Cherokee? That's not going to mean what it means today, and what it means today is not what it meant to those people, you know, on the Trail of Tears.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this really fascinating and really heartfelt idea of legacy that ties,
Mm,
I think, the book together. A legacy and ambition, I thought, were two themes that really
mm.
just shone through in the pages. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about like what you wanted to do with that and how that comes through with our main character, Steph.
Yes. In terms of ambition, I love that you said that, like just that word, right up at the top of this conversation. Because I thought at the beginning of writing this that it was going to be a pretty straightforward ambition story, just because
Mm,
at the very center, we've got one woman who has such a strong desire for one thing that's just about her. Like, I want to go to the moon.
Right.
Um, and she thinks about that like at any cost. So I was surprised and delighted just as a person, because this is what matters more to me, that it presented itself pretty early on as a family saga
Mhm.
and a book about connection and belonging. I feel like it wouldn't hold any of the things that I think matter about being a person if it were just about ambition. There's a place for ambition. I get, people are allowed to want things, but not at the cost. I think not at the cost of, how this is actually a book about mothers and daughters, sisters, chosen family, all these different kinds of family and connection. And how thinking forward in terms of what you said about legacy is the point of it. It's not about like, buying a seat on a spaceship.
Yeah, because that's what I really love about this book is that we can have a character who wants something so deeply and who is
Mm,
deeply ambitious and will do anything to get to where she needs to go. But to also explore how that really impacts the people in her orbit. Excuse the pun, or actually,
that's a new
no,
one, actually. I thought I'd heard all the puns, but I really like the orbit one.
I'm gonna leave that in there, actually. I think everyone needs to hear that.
They do.
But yeah, I love how it really does you explore how it impacts the people, around her and especially in her romantic relationships, we
Yes.
can see how that ambition, even if we think about like our own partners and maybe what we'd want to see in a partner, ambition I
Mm,
think would be a good thing, but then we can also see like the negatives to it in this book. And I loved
mm,
how you wrote that.
thank you. Yeah, there's certainly negatives in terms of um, Steph trying to find a place for herself. And I think she does not think about, as an ambitious person, she doesn't think about, and often we don't always think about the people who who help make space for each other's ambition.
Right.
I'm a new parent, a very
Hey,
new parent of like,
congrats.
thank you. I'm obsessed with her, but it's been 6 months, and just in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of conversation with friends who are also new parents about how do you make space for ambition, which we think of as like an individual thing, and also love and connection and all of these things that the book is about,
Right.
life is about, and something that Steph doesn't make room for, I think, at first in this novel is how even just like for me to be on this conversation with you, like we've got all these people in publishing who've been working on this book for 2 years, and then the baby is asleep, and I've got like three people on deck if she wakes up and cries, and like that's not a part of ambition that like limits your ambition. It's just like a
Yeah.
what makes all of this worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's
Hmm.
also, like you said, the way of life, So
Hmm.
I think that something that I loved about this book too was how we kind of measure success.
Mm.
And I think that that's a journey Steph has to go on and really learn herself in this book. But you tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. You're absolutely right.
So we first meet Steph as a little girl, and we follow her through adolescence into adulthood. What was it like to actually write from her perspective as a young child?
So much fun. Really, really fun. I love a coming of age novel. And this is definitely a queer coming of age novel.
Mhm.
But I think my favorite chapter in terms of just like me having a good time was when Steph does a school play early on in the book, and she has a crush on one of her fellow cast members, and it's just a delight to get to exist in like a young person's really small but very important world. Like big things are happening on a very small stage. Um, and then to see where it goes from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved how you wrote her as a child because I think a lot of times when we read children's perspectives, it can really
Mm,
lean into this is an adult writing a child's voice, but it felt
mm,
very authentic and very young to me, just like genuinely.
mm.
And something that I always think is so important to show when you're writing from a child's perspective is, and you do this really well, that they have just it's the total lack of agency that
Yes.
children have and how we need to we need to protect them, but we also need to like let them breathe and find their own way in the world. But how do we do that when they have such like a lack of agency? And so I love the way that you
Mm.
explore that. So can you talk to me a little bit about like how you really found that young voice in her?
Well, I love how you said that about
Oh,
sort of that
thanks.
mission, that mission statement. I'm going to try to remember that in terms of children. How did I find that young voice? I thought growing up that I only wanted to write young adults.
Hmm.
Um, and by growing up, I don't mean like when I was 10. I mean when I was
Yeah.
when I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s, I was really afraid to write anybody who was older than me. I think I believed that I had to experience something before writing it. And so I was surprised and interested when, as I got older, it's not those feelings and that tension that you were just talking about that didn't start to feel like less relevant or less important to me. If anything, it only deepened with my understanding of like, oh, this is actually, these are the complicated questions that these young people are heading towards. And I want to continue to take those young people seriously now that I know the weight and the excitement of what's ahead of them. And then in terms of the jobs I've had, I've mostly been a teacher. So I've spent a lot of time either a teacher or for a while I was a nonprofit worker in high schools. I enjoy working with young people.
Yeah, and I think that just joy and that familiarity with young people really comes through on the page. Because
Mm.
also, like you talked about, you talked a little bit about Steph doing the school play.
Mm.
That was one of my favorite scenes because I think that it really showcased how you balance comedy and tragedy in this book really well. There were
Mm.
scenes where I was truly tearing up and having my heart break at something happen. But almost every time, not long after, I was laughing at something that a character did or laughing at something, the way Steph thought about something so outrageously. I was like, there's
Yes.
so many times where I was like, Steph, please, I need you to work with me.
Hmm. It's a very familiar feeling.
But I think that one of the most perfect examples of that is really that play when Steph is just totally crushing on her co-star while they're literally like reenacting their ancestors dying on the Trail of Tears. So I wonder if you
Yes.
can talk to
Important
me a little
context
bit
for the
about
play.
writing that. If you could talk to me about like writing that scene and just balancing comedy and tragedy.
I actually, first off, I think that scene, a lot of the scenes in this book got funnier after I started working with Margot Schickminter and Bobby Mustin Owen, so the US and the UK editors for this book. They're funny people, very, very, very funny people. And so they didn't ever tell me, this book is a little bit funny sometimes, but we want it to be funnier. It was more just that I really respect them as people. I love talking to them. I love laughing with them and getting to be involved in like understanding that this book is now a group project meant that I felt inspired over the last couple of years with them to make them laugh whenever I could. Um, in the context of that particular scene, it is outrageous, but I was leaning into the just total despair that is part of the story of the Cherokee people. And I won't even say the Trail of Tears because I think that the way I remember the story of Cherokee people being presented to me in my fourth grade textbook was was the story of the Trail of Tears. It was like this is a group that is relevant in, the Southeast where I was studying it. Like this is a group that is relevant for the story of their like almost destruction. And now we're gonna like move on to other things that happened in Tennessee. And so there's this tendency to, even with Native people, to think about like the ancestors in a way that's like really broad and really sad and is over. And again, like I just keep going back to how a mission for the book was like everybody gets to be a person, like an individual person, everybody gets to make decisions in terms of agency, and who gets to have it in what ways and what they're going to do with it. And then we'll go from there. But I wanted it to be uh, specific so that there would be room for surprises and room for there being some kind of future or hope.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that definitely, I mean, your mission statement for the book or that hope
Yeah.
that you have for the book, I think it definitely comes through
Thank you.
because we actually do get to read from different character perspectives in this book, which we will come to or which we will talk about. But I do just want to go back for a minute to something you
Yeah.
said about this understanding that your book was now a group project with your editors. Can you tell
Mhm.
me, like, how does that feel when you come to that realization and you hand your book off, whether it's to your editors or whether it's getting ready to give this to the world and have readers, actually dive in
Ooh.
and get to know your characters? If you could tell me a little bit just about what's that like.
So I haven't gotten to experience that with readers yet. This is my first podcast interview, which is very exciting. Um, I've already had this experience of taking the book that was like just me, just me, and sometimes workshops, sometimes a couple of friends, and learning how beautiful of an experience it is to get to kind of have like art friends, have these three people who are so good at their jobs, just push you to think in a different way about the book, and they read it in a in some different ways than I did, and it's only gotten so much more meaningful and more interesting to me, having gone through that unexpected project. And because of that experience, now when I think about readers experiencing this book, now I feel like this is going to be kind of in line with that. They're not going to read it and then like talk to me about how can we change it. It's done. But it makes me excited about, whether they like it or they don't like it. It's going to I now know what it's like for a book to take on a different kind of life when it's off like the computer, when it's more of a group project.
Yes, absolutely. And I love how creating art like this can inspire conversations
Mm,
and it can inspire, book clubs. It can inspire even someone else's novel down the line. I mean, that is really the beauty of creating, I think.
yeah, I agree that that's definitely been true for me. You read a lot of books in the years it takes to write a novel, and it's hard to imagine this one without all of the people who were writing books that made me rethink things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going back to what we were talking about when it comes to Steph's character, I know we talked a little bit about how you formed her voice as a child, and I wonder if you can tell me more about really bringing her to life as an adult. Because, like I said, I did want to shake her sometimes, but in a loving way. I do
Same.
love her, but she she was making me a little crazy sometimes.
Yes, there are definitely easier characters in this book to love, than stuff.
It's worth it though. Loving her is worth it, and understanding her, I think, is worth it because
Mm.
the journey that we go on with her character is just so great. So I wonder if you can tell me about like actually fleshing her out as an adult and what you wanted to do with her adult character.
Well, one thing that happened when she was an adult is, I think as a child, her world was so small. Most children, their worlds are small. And the tension within the family was really strong. It was real. Um, but she was still only having to navigate her relationships with like a couple people.
Yeah.
And those people loved her very much and were willing to like bend to her will sometimes. So I don't think this was a conscious realization. Um, it was just plot. It was like her life happening. But now that I'm thinking of it, I realize that as you get older, first she's right after high school, she's thrown into this like fancy liberal arts college across the country. And now class is going to matter in a different way. She's in this group of all these different Native students from all around the country. So that's just like step one of her world and her experience, her understanding of herself, widening, and that just sort of like, I know this is what happens in life, but as she gets older, it just that cast gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the
Mhm.
concerns and the complications get bigger and bigger. Um, and you can't just have that same, or you shouldn't still have
Yeah,
that more childlike understanding, of course, of the world is built for me.
right.
Um, and so didn't plan for her to be navigating that in that way. But now, of course, I understand that that's a major part of growing up is like, does she want to be alone forever and like pushing everyone away? Because what matters is like what she wants as an individual, or is there room to compromise or even just to see the value in other people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of love that you also grow with your character, especially knowing that you wrote this 12 years ago when you were still in college. I feel like I kind of
Yes.
love that it was more of like an unconscious thing of having her go through this character development because it seems like she grew with you.
She definitely grew with me. Yes. And one way I've been thinking about it lately, because I am so, in baby world right now, is that so I said when I started it, I was in college, which means that I had just left my parents' house. And it's like, oh, now I'm a new adult. And I wanted to have a kid for a long time that this book was being written. But I ended up turning in the copy edits right like from the pre-op room for my C-section. So,
Oh my goodness.
which wasn't on purpose. Like everything's fine, but it was like a slightly early delivery.
Wow.
But I guess it was after I know that after copy edits, you do continue to like work on the book for first pass pages and second pass pages, etc. Like I'm working on the book right now. It just not on the page in terms of having conversations
Right.
about it, getting it ready for the world. But when we think about making real changes to this story, I feel like it happened in the entirety of my like being an adult kind of on her own. And
Wow.
like it's a mothers and daughters book, and then I became a mom. And the book was over. At least this one.
That's incredible. I can't believe you turned in those edits right
Yeah, it was
before your
bizarre.
C-section. That's wild. That's what. So you really are just in a time of new beginnings right now, then.
Yes. Yeah, very,
That's
very much
that's
so.
that's an exciting place to be in, but it can also if I feel like it would be a little scary in some ways too.
I'm mostly really, really excited about this book being in the world. It is a new and strange thing. But I'm glad that I have so many people who are in it with me. And I
Yeah.
mean like other debut writers and other writers in general, but I mostly mean like, you know, the people who are on the team of the book, like people in at Avid Reader Press and people like, booksellers who I've gotten to meet, just all of these people who have read the book and put a lot of their time and care into it make me feel more like, okay, this is like this. I want to be working on something that involves other people, and that's what this is.
Yeah, yeah. Like we said before, I think that books can inspire community, and it's nice
Mm,
to know that, like you said before, this book is more of like a group project at this
yes.
stage in its life. And it's only going to get more so, and your community is only going to grow,
Mm,
even more while by the time this book comes out. So that's a nice thing to think about, I think.
yes. We're reminding ourselves as we get nervous.
I would love to go back and talk about character because we have Della Owens, and I wonder if you could tell our listeners a little bit about her character and really what you wanted to do with her character in the book.
She's my favorite.
Me too.
She's definitely my favorite character. She's actually the first character who ever showed up in this story. Because
Wow.
before it was even a book about an astronaut, I just really care for her well-being. And some of that goes back to the issues of agency with children. So what happens with Della is she's um, adopted as a baby by this couple that ignores the Indian Child Welfare Act. The Indian Child Welfare Act is a really important federal law, and it establishes a preference order when we're talking about the removal or placement of Indian children. So, step one is find a home with a member of the child's family. Step two is find a home with a member of the child's same tribe. Step three is with a member of a native tribe within the country, with a federally recognized native nation. And so her adoptive family, they go through an agency that does not follow the law. There's then a custody battle that goes on for years between the adoptive family and the biological family. And two things that stood out for me in Della's story is one, that she's really, really very much loved.
Mhm.
Everyone involved in this story is well-meaning, and also Della is so let down by these older people these adults who are not supposed to let this happen.
Mhm.
And then the second thing that stands out to me is what it means for her identity and for the control that she should be able to have over who she is, and what part of her heritage she should have ownership over. Um, and that's because of like the media storm around what happens. Her case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. She spends her early childhood in the limelight in that way. And so when we really first get to know her in this book, she's in college. She's in college with Steph, our wannabe astronaut, and she struggles with how much she's able to kind of rewrite her own story of like, oh, actually, I've grown up in this non-native household. I do have some curiosity about, what my life might have been, what my life could be, and she has to deal with that tension, like in an environment of like everybody you meet knows your story. They know what like the Supreme Court was saying about you and how native you are, and how you should live, all kinds of things that like ideally a person would get to figure out for themselves if they were older.
Right, right. Absolutely. I thought it was so fascinating that she kind of has this, again, coming back to this idea of legacy. She's got this legacy that she wasn't even fully conscious
Mm,
for, that she already has established in her life. I mean, she's kind of like you said, like a pseudo celebrity, and she doesn't really know what to do with that as an adult. And I think she grapples a lot with her identity. And I think we see this in Steph too, where I know Steph struggles a bit with feeling like her heritage comes first before her wants to be an astronaut or before her brain or her mind.
yeah.
And so I really thought their dynamics together were so compelling just to see, in those two separate characters and those two different scenarios, like how they interacted with one another, which wasn't always smoothly.
No, it's a college first love queer coming of age situation. So not smooth. Um, but I also think that they're both offering something to the other that they worry. I think at that age, at that stage of life, they worry they can't get it anywhere else and they can't find it in themselves.
Right.
Um, and so it's a tricky beginning, but it's not an unheard of beginning. This is something something that many go through.
Yes, yes, no, absolutely. I also wonder if you can tell me how you knew that you wanted Della to have her own chapters and you wanted to write from her perspective.
I think the moment was that it was her first chapter. The first chapter that was from Della's voice was the first chapter of the book that existed.
Okay.
Um, and so it was less of a decision to include her voice and more of a decision that I didn't want to stop.
Yeah.
I didn't want to leave her. I wanted to continue spending time with her.
Mm,
Um, and then another thing, not just in terms of Della's voice, but in terms of Hannah and Kayla and all of these other like epistolary moments we have in the book. Those came out of a realization later on that those three characters in particular, each of them from like a different way in, they're all pretty preoccupied with this idea of how they're of representation, like how they're seen
mm,
from the outside as Native women. Um, Quick examples are we've been talking about Della, and how her story has been told for her, but for Hannah, Steph and Kayla's mother, she's running away from this really painful past, and she's
Yeah.
throwing her heart into the idea that like if her daughters could just like lean in and like let themselves be grounded by the concept of like their Cherokee ancestors and their like wisdom, traditions, etc., then like that's what's going to save the next generation.
Yeah.
Then we got Kayla, Steph's sister, who becomes a native like activist slash social media influencer, and she has the literal pressure, or the pressure of literally thousands of followers wanting to see her perform in a certain way. So
Mhm.
knowing that people in this book are paying attention to how people see them and measure them and understand them in terms of their identity, that meant that by letting them present themselves, whether that's through like social media posts or their own points of view, text messages, emails, like Tinder dating profiles, like I wanted
Yeah.
these characters to get it to show us how they would present themselves.
Yes, I love that because I did want to ask you a little bit about writing those different sections. Like we have Instagram posts, we have dating profiles, we have even like comment sections.
Mm.
How did you actually go about writing those? I feel like it had to have been a fun part of writing the book.
Not only was it a fun part of writing the book, but the first section like that, the Tinder profiles, was just like a fun writing exercise because people are always saying like, if you don't know what's next, like try having all your characters wear hats. So I thought I would just like try having Steph write dating profiles for 10 years, and it was very fun. Um, and it wouldn't have been allowed to stay in the book if it were like just fun, but it was like realizing that second layer of like, oh, each time we see her over a decade, she's choosing to present herself in a different way, often kind of outrageously and in different ways. And so once it like meant something, then I was allowed to see where that went with other forms.
Yeah, and I loved seeing how you used those dating profiles, especially and just like text messages later on and like IMing and things like that later on, to show how Steph kind of evolved and came out of her shell. I remember one of the first dating profiles, I read it and I was like, Steph, you're doing so good. I was so proud of her. Do you do you feel like it helped you learn anything about her as a character actually writing those profiles?
Ooh, yes, but I don't think because we see such big shifts between some of those profiles.
Yeah.
I don't really think it gave me enough time to, I don't think it gave me enough time to appreciate, oh, I really get where she is in year
Oh,
3 of the PhD program. Like, this is where she is emotionally, this is what's going on in her life. I don't really know
mm,
fully what was going on in her life, but just stepping back, it definitely gave me an understanding of we're not going to include a decade of her life, but or that sorry, we're not going to include that decade of her life, but as someone who had just gone through a decade of my life while writing the book, like I understand that you can begin in point A, end in point B. Change will have happened for you and for the other people around you who like continue to exist as their own people. And so it was a nice like reminder and starting point for all of the scenes that would come after, the grad school era.
yes, that makes sense. That makes sense. And like we talked about, we know that Steph will do anything she can to become an astronaut. That is her main goal in life. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about the research that you actually did and just what it was like to look up the specifics of like space travel and what it really means to become an astronaut and like how many steps you have to take until you can maybe become an astronaut and
Maybe.
just how is that process?
It turns out that process is so hard. It turns out it takes so long. I could easily have just researched this,
Mm.
and not written it. So instead, what I did is I did a lot of reading, uh, fiction, not even necessarily fiction about astronauts, fiction about the diverse human experiences that are happening. So reading fiction unrelated to the book while I was writing the book kept me grounded in like, okay, what matters is story and these characters' relationships to one another. That was like one thread. And then in terms of research, I had pretty strict rules for myself because in the past I have gone down the rabbit hole of you're researching when like you should be writing. So what I would do is I would uh, read things like I don't know, for example, like a memoir of an astronaut, and then get like enough information from that uh, to say, all right, if I now that I know that in this next scene there's going to be an underwater habitat experiment thing happening. Now that I know that, see, the way I just described that. Very technical. So now that I know that that's what's happening, now I can go down a rabbit hole for a set period of time each day of, we can watch the YouTube video of a tour of this underwater habitat that does exist. Uh, and sort of focusing on one aspect at a time as it relates to the characters was helpful, as was getting people to check my work after I'd actually written the book. My UK editor's father is an astrophysicist and a scuba
Wow.
diver. So shout out to him for like those two things. Even the scuba diving, like those two things do come up in the book, and I needed someone to tell
Yeah.
me that I was wrong in many places.
What was the most interesting piece of information on space or becoming an astronaut or anything that you came across in your research that you'd like to share?
What's funny is that since I'm not a scientist, my favorite um okay, what's funny is that I'm not a scientist and I always loved science. Then I stopped being good at science because math became involved and I'm not good at math.
Me
Like
either.
surprise the writer who's not good at math. But I stayed, and this is also maybe related to like childhood Star Trek. Um, I stayed interested in the story of science and the mission of science and the optimism of science. So that means that even when I think about my favorite facts and like research and things that I learned in this book, none of them are about like, oh, this is like what a supernova is. Those things were actually like even difficult for me to like. I would have to sit with them and be like, do I get it? Do I get it? Um, the things that stuck with me were all had to do with story and people, with things that like were not actually in space. And so
Yeah.
my favorite, this is a long way of saying, my favorite was that there was somebody on Reddit with a now deleted profile who was in this thread where people were asking each other like, how can we become astronauts? What can we do? Like, what grad school should we go to become an astronaut? Which like I would totally do that if I wanted to be an astronaut. I would try to like make a checklist. And so there was someone on Reddit who posted once, like 7 years ago, saying that they had once had lunch with an astronaut and that the astronaut had said that you shouldn't try to be an astronaut. Uh, you certainly shouldn't like go to school and get a certain degree in order to be an astronaut. Instead, you should find something that you really love and that you're interested in and that you can imagine like studying forever. And you should go like make a career in that. And then as you're like living that life, then if there's a call for the next astronaut candidate class, like by all means apply. But it's hard to be an astronaut. And I didn't take from that they were saying like your dreams are dumb, don't try. But it was like, how can we build a satisfying life and contribute in whatever way, what can we control?
I love that story because I think we see that come up in the book.
Yes.
And that Steph even has to learn that too.
I think she learns that from someone who is also a scientist and has like much better mental health than she does.
Yes, and I think it's such great advice, even for, aside from trying to become an astronaut. I think that it's a really great way to stay grounded in our own wants and hopes and dreams because life is just so unpredictable. I
Yes,
mean, if it and I think it comes back to this idea of how do we measure success, right? Is it by certain milestones? Is it by, the number in our bank account, or is it by, the people that we meet and how we connect with the world and maybe the art that we make? I think that
definitely.
it's a really important way to stay grounded.
Yes, absolutely.
I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about some of the your influences, like maybe some of the books that made you want to be a writer one day, or some of the authors that you look for for inspiration.
I'm so excited about this question. For this book, I have a few different ways into it, and not just books. So if we start with movies, then I love, um, not just I love, like I will sob at any movie where there's like a coming of age situation where like a young woman has to make a decision and like realize that you can't be or do everything and there are consequences, good or bad. So that means Brooklyn, Past Lives, and Coda.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Oh, just
incredible
cry, cry,
choices.
cry. And then in terms of books that influenced this one, LaRose by Louise Erdrich
Mm,
was she was actually the first native writer who, when I was in high school, I like was first conscious of that's what I was reading, but I also it was the first time
wow.
I was conscious of um I finished reading The Painted Drum and
Okay.
I was finally like I don't know, familiar enough with books and writing to say like, oh, I am moved. This is artful. Like I understand what it is to like make art now. So and Rose in terms of this book, I think made me think about what makes a family.
Mhm.
Um, and then if I could just do a few more. So we've got
Please.
Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshanandan. Before the Mango Ripens by Afabwaje Kurian.
Mm,
Let's see. Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanon
mhm.
Jeffers.
Yeah.
Show Don't Tell by Curtis Sittenfeld.
Yes.
Um, Calling for a Blanket Dance by Oscar Okia.
Mm.
And there were a couple of documentaries.
No, that's great. I think we're creating a really great, just like essential guide
There's
to the
so
moon and
many.
back. Required reading and watching and listening. I love
Just
that.
want everyone to read and watch everything. So documentaries wise, they're both Cherokee. One of them is called the Cherokee Word for Water. Another is called Dadiwonisi, We Will Speak, and it's directed by Sean Duncan, who corrected all of my incorrect Cherokee language moments in this book. Uh, and then finally, so in terms of TV, in 2014, I watched Mohawk Girls, this Canadian show that was billed as like the Mohawk Sex in the City. And it was like fun, 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 fun. And then later, with everyone else, I loved Reservation Dogs. And right now, if there's a show I could just like ask everybody to watch, it would be another Canadian show. It would be North of North.
North of North. I don't know that one. I'm gonna have to check that out.
It's really charming. It's so charming. They
Yeah.
just finished their, I don't know if they just finished it, but they've done their first season. And I'm excited for the second.
Oh, that's so exciting. I love knowing these things, just to the mystery of piecing together like which or what art inspired other art and how we can kind of see that. Like especially thinking about what you said about Brooklyn Past Lives and Coda. Like,
Mm.
yeah, I can see that reflected in this book. That's amazing. I love that.
No astronauts, but yearning.
Yearning. We need more yearning. What do you hope your readers, either learn about or feel
Mm,
after coming away from this book about Steph and, the journey that she went on?
it's a great question. I hope readers are left with the feeling of family, whatever that means to them, and belonging.
Hmm.
I think in this book, it was important to me that there were so many different kinds of families. Um, Single parent families, adoptive families. Um, we've got like the ancestors, the cool gay aunt. We have all of these different people, chosen family who are
Hmm.
figuring out how to be together, like not just for themselves, but for whatever comes next. And so if I take that idea of family and then we expand it for these characters to also include tribal nation, and also for all of us include humanity, then I think that with this book, when I step away from it, which is strange to finally be doing, but when I step away from it, it makes me think about um, how when we understand ourselves as part of that greater whole, then it pushes us to um, to fight for one another and to fight
Yeah,
for whatever comes next.
that's amazing. Thank you so much, Eliana. Thank you so much for joining us on Port Over. To the Moon and Back is out now.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to meet you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.